Alrighty. Got it open, Christian? Awesome. Alright, you guys. This is where we left off last time. We had put bones in pretty much every major spot of this thing. When I opened it up earlier, the bones had shrank in size again, so if your bones are real small and you want to make them a little bit bigger and easier to work with, just go ahead and go up to Display Animation Joint Size, and I scaled the little scaler up to about 10. So we're in a pretty good spot here. Looks like we're almost ready for some skinning. I did notice that there was this little crank over here that we didn't put a bone on. So I figured we go ahead and just grab this bone that's right here on the bolt and Control D, duplicate it, and then you can hold V on the keyboard while you move and go ahead and V snap it to the center of the that center vertex of the crank, and you can name that joint crank.
Thinks that the actual parts of them aren't fully modeled.
Say again.
That the actual parts of the whole mechanism isn't entirely modeled.
Which part?
The part that the crank activates, and the
Oh yeah.
semicircle that slides back.
Well, we'll still, as a rigger, regardless of if it's modeled or not, we'll just go ahead and put a bone there and a control to make this thing turn, just in case somehow, some way, somebody needs it. So again, I just grabbed this bone that's over here. It's our bolt, and Control D, I've duplicated it, and I've moved it and V snapped it to the center vertice of this crank here, and I went ahead and named that crank. And for some strange reason, it's named crank 1, which makes me think that there's another bone. Yeah, it looks like we named this one back here crank. Well, let's call this one crank, and then let's call this one over here, I want to call it like pulley. Is there an E in pulley? Yeah, there's an E in pulley. So we'll rename this back one pulley, and then we'll name this one just crank instead of crank 1. Alright, so now we're about done placing all of our joints. What we can do is start parenting them. The arrow here needs to be parented to the bow joint. Not sure why I called that center bolt. That could just be called bow. Oh, maybe I called these bow. Nope.
I think you wanted that one so it could.
Oh yeah. Okay. So grab the arrow, shift select the center bolt here, and hit P. Let's make sure that that arrow is parented to the center bolt. Just hit P. So you want to, again, you'll want to first select the arrow, then shift select the center bolt, then hit P. The right and the left, or the front and the back wheel can be parented to the root, as well as the center bolt can be parented to the root. So you can actually select the center bolt, the back wheel and the front wheel all at the same time, then shift select the root and hit P, and they will all three parent at the same time.
Is the arrow parented to the actual bow part?
So the arrow is parented to the center bolt.
And the bows are parented as
Yes. The bows are sent. The right and left bow is parented to the center bolt.
Does it matter which part we select first when we parent?
Yes. When you parent stuff, you want to select the thing that you want to parent, and then next you want to shift select the thing you want to parent to. So child first, then parent. The crank we want to parent also to the center bolt. And the bolt we want to also parent to the center bolt. So when we rotate the center bolt, as you can see here, it's going to rotate the crank and the bolt. So the whole idea behind the center bolt here is so that when we aim this thing to shoot, it rotates all this stuff from that location. And if you look up at the projector, you can see what I'm talking about. The pulley in the back can also be parented to the root. Since the pulley is going to operate kind of on its own, we just need that kind of just chilling on its own. And I can't see really any other moving parts on this thing. I think we're actually okay to start skinning. So let's go ahead and save a copy of this before we start skinning. So just go to File. This is a cool feature on Maya that got added, I don't know when. It's called Increment and Save. And what it does is it'll save Balista.001, which is really cool. And before we go ahead and skin this object, let's go ahead and look at the polygon structure real quick to make sure everything's okay. So go to Windows, Hypergraph Hierarchy. So in the hypergraph hierarchy on the far right, you can see our skeletal structure here. Everything's all parented to the root. The root's at the top. That's exactly what we want. We have a lot of polygon stuff parented under the wheels, which is a little weird.
The wheels are in pieces.
Yes, the wheels are definitely in pieces. So weird. Okay, but other than that, everything looks okay. I'm just gonna leave it as is. I don't care that much. Okay, so what I want you to do is go up to Show, and there's a list of items that you can pull out for show here. There's a little kind of tab at the top, and if you click that tab, it'll pull out your show menu like this. Mine is pretty cool. It allows you to like pull out all these menus. You can have as many floating menus as you want pulled out. And again, to do that, you just come up here to show, and there's a little kind of bar at the top. And if you click that bar, it'll pop the menu right out. The reason we're doing that is so that we can come back and forth to this menu. So what we're going to do first is uncheck joints. So find where it says joints and uncheck joints. And then I want you to select all of your mesh here. Drag a box, select all your mesh, make sure you're in object mode. And then we're going to edit, delete by type history, modify, freeze transformations. Make sure all that is taken care of. And then with all of your objects still selected here, go ahead and turn joints back on. And then I want you to hold shift and click the root. So we have all of our objects selected and the root. Now we need to go ahead and skin this, but we're still in our modeling menu here. So let's change that drop down to rigging in the upper left. And now we can see the skin menu. Now I want you to go to skin and go to the option box for bind skin, and we're going to go ahead and skin this thing. And to do that, we'll leave all the options as is. We're going to leave allow multiple bind poses in case we want to come back and add more stuff to this. Maintain max influences, so this is going to allow us to make sure that each object can be influenced by 5 joints if we wanted to. We want to uncheck remove unused influences. So basically, I mean, we pretty much added all the joints in here we want, so there's not going to be any unused influences. We can colorize the skeleton, that's fine. I don't even know why they have that option in here. Having a colored skeleton never did anything for me. And then go ahead and hit apply. So when you hit apply, it should have had a good result.
Mine says bindable objects.
Okay, so you need to shift select all of your objects first,
Did you
then shift select the root.
delete by type history transformation?
So you want to turn off your joints,
Oh,
drag a box over all the objects,
Okay.
then turn your joints back on, shift select the root.
So click joint,
shift like just where
select all.
In order to skin something, you need to have all of the objects selected that you want to skin and the joints. Okay, you don't have to select all the joints, but you have to select the root so it knows what objects you want to skin to what bones. Okay? Otherwise, how does Maya know what the heck you want to skin to what? Make sense? Pretend you're talking to a human, telling them what you want to skin. Okay, so when that works, over on the right hand side you'll see a list of outputs, and you're going to see a bind pose and a bunch of skin clusters. Okay, so your skin clusters are basically just different objects that have been skinned. They're each assigned a skin cluster. The bind pose is the pose or the position of the joints that they're in right now where they were bound. Okay, and at any point in time you can always go back to the bind pose if you move joints around or whatever. So for example, I'll move this joint up here. I can select the root and go to skin, go to bind pose, and it'll take me back to the pose where it was originally bound. Okay. Alright, so now we have skinned this. Let's go ahead and do an increment and save. File, increment and save. It's going to save it as Balista 002. And now we can start skinning. So let's go ahead and start with the back wheel. So go ahead and select the back wheel, and then we're going to go up to rigging and double click the paint skin weights tool in the upper left. So again, I click on the rigging tab here and then double click on the paint skin weights tool. And in the paint skin weights tool, you can see all of the joints that are in there. Make sure you're in flat shaded mode. And when you click on root, for example, if you use the up and down arrows, you can cycle through all the joints. And as you cycle through them, you can see them highlight in blue on the right. So that tells you which joints you actually have selected in the list. And as you highlight these joints, you'll notice that on the tires and axle, it'll change colors from black to white. Black means 0 influence, and white means influence. Okay, so if something's solid white, that means it's 100% influenced by that particular joint. Alright, so we have our back tire selected here. So let's go ahead and find back wheel, which is right at the top. And you can see the little joint in the center there, the blue one that's highlighted. We'll scroll down to where it says value. Make sure value is set to 1, and then just hit flood. Now if you wanted to test that, you can X out the paint skin weights tool, click the arrow, click that little joint and rotate it, and as you can see, it rotates just fine. However, it's rotating a bunch of other stuff also. So this is, let's test something here. Alright, so this is usually a problem that happens it's weird. Okay, so this is usually a problem that happens when you skin something for the first time with Maya. Maya will just make guesses as to what is supposed to be skinned to what. So oftentimes what I like to do is, if something is a hard surface like this, I'll pretty much just start off fresh and select all of the objects and flood them all to the root. The only thing that we want to keep though is the weighting on the bow. So really what we want to try and do is just grab all the objects here except for the bow, and then flood them to the root so that we can just kind of start fresh. So if you go to show and turn off joints, oh, look at that. Boy, did we get lucky. Okay, the bow is its own object, which is awesome. So just pretty much select everything but the bow. So we want to keep that bow weighting. Actually, what you can do is just drag a selection over everything, and then if you hold Control, you can then click the bow, and it will deselect just the bow. Then you can turn your joints back on. Double click your paint skin weights tool and flood everything to the root. So everything will be solid white when you flood it to the root, except for the bow. We want to keep that smooth, bending bow weighting. Alright. Now I'm going to go ahead and assume that since that arrow joint is close to the bow, that it has some influence over the bow, and it does. Yep. So as you can see, as we move the arrow around, it moves some part of the bow. So we need to remove the weighting from the arrow onto the bow. So it's very easy to do that. If you click the bow, double click your paint skin weights tool, and what we can do is we can cycle through all of the joints here to see which joints other than the bow joints have influence over the bow. And it looks like center bolt does. So go ahead and click on center bolt, and what we're going to do is change the value to 0 and flood it. And what that's going to do is remove the influence the center bolt has over the bow. Okay, we're also going to do that same thing for the arrow. So click the arrow, flood with a value of 0, and just to be sure that arrow tip is over there, we're going to go ahead and do that one also, just because it's over in the area. So now the only thing that should be moving the bow is the bow joints, and you can test that by selecting the top 2 bow joints and moving them around, and you can see nothing else is lingering except for those. Now the string or the rope that's attached onto the bow is not weighted to the bow. As you can see, when I move around up here, that string does not move with the bow. That's a problem. So we need to select basically the string but really we need like the vertices that are over here. So what I would do is go into wireframe mode. So click on the string here and then click 4 on your keyboard, and let's hide the joints. Make sure they're not in the way, so go to show joints. And what we're going to do is we're going to right click and hold, and we want to select just the vertices that are in that area, just like this, of the rope. Basically it's going to be the tip of the rope and then also the rope strands. So we can, with that vertice selection, you can bind that using the paint skin weight, or not bind it, but you can skin it using the paint skin weights tool by finding that would be the last joint on the right, which is R bow 3 or 4, R bow 4. And if you can turn back on your joints and you can cycle through them in the paint skin weights tool here. And then make sure your value is set to 1 and flood. And that way you can test it by moving the top joint. And as you move the top joint, you can see that the rope is now attached to the top part of the bow over here. So if I move or bend this bow in any way, that rope is always going to stay attached. You can also rotate it. It does the same thing. So I'll do the other side now for some of you guys who weren't able to keep up. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in to that left side of the bow here. And I can see my rope over here. If I move this joint, it's not attached. So what I'm going to do is hide my joints so they're out of the way. Show joints. And then I'm going to select the rope here. Right click and hold. Go to vertex. And I'm just going to drag a box over the rope and that front section. Okay. Just drag a box and it will select all the vertices in that cluster. So then I can turn back on my joints, double click the paint skin weights tool, and now this is the left side, so I'm going to find the farthest left joint here on the bow, and then make sure my value is set to 1 and then hit flood. So I flooded that cluster of vertices on the bow. So now if I rotate either part of the bow, the rope now will follow. It's exactly what we want.
Does your string on the right side, when it gets closer to the pulley, not work?
Down here?
Yeah.
I haven't tested that yet. Probably does not work.
Both my bow, the wings are rotating independently of each other. I think I missed.
What's wrong?
Well, this one rotates, but they won't rotate like yours.
You mean like this?
Yeah, they're not rotating together.
Oh, I shift selected each one
Oh, okay.
and did this. While we're waiting, you can go ahead and flood that arrow. That should be pretty easy. Just click the arrow, double click the paint skin weights tool, find the arrow in here, and flood. That should be a pretty easy one to flood. And also go ahead and flood the front and back tires again. So click the tire, double click the paint skin weights tool, pick the specific tire, and flood. Same thing for the other one. Click the tire, double click the paint skin weights tool, find it, and flood. We'll give these a test. So the arrow should move the arrow. Back tire should just move the back tire. Front tire should just move the front tire. That arrow tip shouldn't do a whole lot of anything. It's just there for joint aiming purposes. Also, in case maybe a visual effects person wanted to like set this arrow on fire or something, or a programmer wanted to use that joint tip for some sort of an aiming thing or something. Alright, so we flooded the arrow, the front tire, and the back tire. Now let's go ahead. You should be able to flood the pulley, or not pulley, what's this thing called? Crank. It's pretty easy to select that crank. You can just click on it, right click and hold, and grab a chunk of vertices on it. So right click and hold and do vertex. Grab some vertices, and we're going to use our shift and greater than trick, greater than key on your keyboard trick. So if you hold shift and then tap the greater than key a couple times, it will select all the vertices on that pulley. And the reason we're using this is because that object is combined with these other objects, and we can't select it individually, so we have to select it by vertex. And I'm also noticing an issue where it's selected that main kind of pull through there, but it didn't select any vertices in the centerpiece. So you'll have to also hold shift and click one of those vertices, and then hold shift, or then tap, yeah, hold shift and use your greater than tool. Make sure you get that center object also in there, and then you can go ahead and flood that to the crank joint. So once those are all selected, double click your paint skin weights tool, find the crank joint, wherever the hell that is, crank, and then hit flood. I'll go over that one more time. So I'm just gonna, as I click that, you'll notice that the object is combined with all these other objects down here. That's a problem for selecting objects individually, so we have to select the object by vertex. So in order to do that, you can just select the object to start, then right click and hold, go to vertex, grab a cluster of vertices on there, and then also shift select one of the vertices on the center object. Then if you hold shift on your keyboard and tap the greater than symbol a bunch of times, it will start selecting vertices throughout that object until they're all selected. Then you can double click your paint skin weights tool, find the crank, make sure value is at 1, and flood. And for you guys that can go ahead and move ahead here, we need the bolt piece here needs to be flooded to that bolt joint, and that's going to be tricky to select because I don't know what's supposed to move here. Looks like there's like a lock on there or something. This is a really weird.
You know, that half moon object would rotate out of the way. Yeah, that
This thing.
So
it looks like this would pull back,
right,
and then this would rotate.
and then that thing's
Oh yeah. Okay, so that being the case, we need to add a couple more joints in here. This will be good practice for once you've got something skinned and weighted, if you want to add some more joints. Let's go ahead and save and increment this. So go to File, Increment, and Save. So, yeah, as it was brought to my attention here, it looks like this thing has a locking mechanism on the bolt here. Looks like this little piece kind of moves back, and then this little half moon piece kind of rotates out of the way. And now that I'm looking at it, at first I thought this little turn here was used to pull the bolt back, but in fact that's what this thing is used for. This little turn here is used to lock the bolt in place, and I guess this is like the trigger to fire or something.
Yeah, that's why I was saying that it'd be a good name for it to be like release or something.
Ah,
That's what I was talking about. It's a shame that the objects of the mechanical parts of it aren't separate. That's
Cool.
what I was saying.
no, you're right. You're absolutely right. This is what happens when modelers don't communicate to riggers. We don't know what the heck you guys made. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a joint. Double click the joint tool, make sure variable bone radius settings is turned off. And what you can do is, if you hold V when you create this joint, you can snap it to the center of that half moon polygon lock thing. And if your vertices aren't showing, you can go up to shading, wireframe on shaded, and if you check that, you should see your wireframe stuff. I'll do that again. If you double click your joints tool, uncheck variable bone radius settings, then go zoom in on that little locking mechanism. If you hold V on your keyboard, V for V-snap, you can click the little center there and it will create a joint right to that center vertex. Then you can hit enter and it will set that joint. And then an easy way, we also need another joint for this other lock to move it out of the way. If you just duplicate that joint and you can move it back and then down. Ooh, I just noticed something.
Maybe use the same joints as the
Yeah,
handle.
yeah, good call. So instead of, well,
That top one you need, the second one you may need to really.
yeah, just we can go ahead and fix these. Actually, let's use these. I'll show you guys how to fix these to where they're angled in the right way. What we can do is if you actually, it may be easier just to duplicate that other joint. Let's try that. So grab the crank joint, Control D to duplicate it, and it's parented here. We can keep that parented actually, and then you can V-snap that to the top here, and that one's angled exactly the way we want it. Duplicate it again, and then that one you can move down. So instead of creating them from scratch, we just duplicated the ones that were on the crank there. And that way they're angled the right way. And I guess what we could probably just call this like lock 1 and lock 2. Call them lock 1 and lock 2. And now what we need to do, so when you duplicate joints, they don't automatically add into the skin weighting. So for example, I just clicked my object here and I'm looking at all the joints in the skin weights tool, or the what's this called, paint skin weights tool. And there's no lock 1 and lock 2. We actually have to add those into the skin weighting. So in order to do that, click lock 1. So click lock 1 and then shift select the lock polygon here, and then go up to Skin, Edit Influences, and there's an option box there. And there's a checkbox in that option box called Lock Weights. Again, we're at Skin, Edit Influences, Add Influence option box. And you want to turn on Lock Weights. And what that's going to do is basically lock the weighting on that polygon so that when we add this influence or this joint, it's not going to affect the weighting of anything else that we've done. So when you're done with that, go ahead and hit apply. And then we want to add the other influence into the weighting also. So select lock 2, shift select the locking polygon, and then hit apply again. So now those are actually added into the weighting. And you guys can use the greater than shift tool to go ahead and flood those. Lock 1 is going to be this little, just this little piece here, and then lock 2 will be the half moon thing with the cylinder sticking through it. So I'll start with lock 1 here. Select one of the vertices on top of it. Hold shift and use the greater than tool, and then I'll double click my paint skin weights tool. I'll find lock 1 and hit flood. I'll do the same thing for the half moon. I'll select a vertice on the half moon, and then I'll select another vertice on the cylinder. Hold shift greater than, select that piece, and then I will flood that to the lock 2 joint. It looks like the top of the cylinder is its own piece, so I have to make sure that that's flooded also. And then you can test it by just clicking the joints and rotating them. So that half moon should rotate out of place, and then the other piece should just move. That way we can pull back and lock our bolts. Alright, for you guys that are ready to move ahead, we need to do the pulley. So if you're gonna have to, this is all one object, so you're gonna have to use the vertice select trick and select both the little starfish things, that axle and the pulley in the center, and then also the rope, and flood that to the pulley joint. So I can select that object here. Actually, a really fast way to do this would be to hide your joints. Select the axle, the rope, and the pulley. And then you can right click vertice on each one, and then if you just drag a box over everything, actually, honestly, the fastest way to do this would be to just select them all as objects, flood everything, and then go back through and flood the things that you don't want to move to the root. So I'll just shift select all the axle and the rope and the pulley, flood that to the pulley, and now I'll rotate it to see what doesn't need to move. So the first thing that doesn't need to move are these blocks that hold the axle into place. So I'll just select the vertices on the corner of these, use my greater than tool, then flood those to the root. Then we have some rope issues. Well, looks like there's another cylinder down there that we need to flood. So I'll shift select the vertices from that, or use my greater than tool, flood that to the root. And the last little bit of this is the tip of the rope that touches the other piece of the rope. You're gonna have to like zoom in. Those vertices on the inside of the rope that are inside the pulley there, those are gonna have to be flooded to the root. So you'll have to like zoom in there and select the vertices of those. One of them is actually really hard to get to. You'll have to kind of select the four corners. Really tricky to get that, and then flood those to the root. And the reason we do that is so that when we rotate the pulley, the whole pulley will rotate, but those little bits will stay in place. So it looks like they're staying in place while the rest of the rope is wrapping around the pulley. And the front part of that rope is moving because we haven't weighted that yet to the bolt. So the front part of that rope, you'll actually have to go in and select those verts and weight those to the bolt. That way when the pulley rotates, it looks like it's rotating and it looks like the rope is staying in place. So I'm basically doing the same stuff over and over here. I'm just in my head just trying to figure out how the hell this thing is mechanically going to move. You know, so all the steps I'm doing here are just like I'm just selecting vertices using my my selection tool with the greater than symbol, and then flooding them. That's it. That's all I'm doing over and over and over again. So when you're skinning stuff like this, especially hard surface, you're just using the same techniques over and over. It's not like you're doing anything different. Just in your head, you have to think mechanically how the hell this thing is going to work. So like the bolt now needs to all move with that bolt joint, and also that back piece of rope that's connected to the bow. So I'm just going to go through and grab a vert on each part of the bolt that's supposed to move. Do my greater than trick. flood that to the bolt. So that when I move my bolt, it moves all the pieces of the bolt together, including that back part of the rope. Uh-oh, found a problem. I broke it. Does anybody have any questions on what things need to be weighted to what? Anybody?
The rope that's attached to the bolt, do you just do the very back part?
Which part?
The one that's attached to the bow.
This piece here?
Yeah.
So this piece here, this chunk, if you right click on it and go to vertex and select that, this chunk here,
Okay.
this will go to the bolt.
Okay.
Could you go over again how you add in joints
To the skin?
so it's fine, yeah, to the skin?
Absolutely. I'm just gonna, whoops, flood these pieces to the bolt. Sure, okay, so adding another influence. So these locks here, I'm gonna add these in. Let's say I just duplicated these, okay? So I'll select one of them, shift select the object that I want to add it to, then you go to skin, edit influences, and the option box for add influence. So then in here there's a checkbox that says lock weights. So I have the joint that I want to add into the skin, and then the object selected, shift selected, and just hit apply. And that will add the influence so that when you have it selected, if you select your paint skin weights tool, you'll see lock 1 and lock 2 now in there. You'll have to do them one at a time though.
Okay.
Can't do them.
The lock weights things.
Yeah. Anybody have any other questions? Did I blow past anybody or anything? I did find a problem. If you were able to skin your rope properly, you'll notice that the modeler, you'll hear me complaining about modelers a lot. The modeler added, for some strange reason, some vertices in the center of one of the side of the ropes, but he didn't add them on the other side of the rope, which is really weird. See that? Don't know why that happened.
As
So
someone who took martial arts modeling course, I do not approve.
no, I blame Grumpy Cat. So what we can do is we can do a couple things. Since this is already skinned, I could just go in there and delete those vertices, but I think that's going to cause problems. So the easier way to do this would be to give those center vertices 50% to one joint that connects to the end of the rope, and then 50% weighting to the other joint. That way it'll just move like as if it didn't even exist. So I can just select that random chunk of vertices in there, double click my paint skin weights tool, and I'm going to flood 100% of that to the bolt, and then I'll change my value to 0.5, and I'm going to flood now 0.5 of that to the farthest joint on the end of the bow. So mine is R bow 4. So I'll flood 0.5 of that now to that. So now theoretically, it's 50% to this joint and 50% to this joint. So when I move the joint, kind of works. It's still goofy. It's not perfect, but the other option would just delete it. So I'll try deleting it here and see if it breaks anything. It didn't break anything. So to delete it, for all you guys who took modeling class, you'll have to delete the edge first, the edge loop. So in order to do that, right click edge, and you can double click the edge and it will select the entire edge loop, and then you can delete the edge loop. Then you'll have to right click and get those vertices. So select the vertices and delete those also. So you have to delete edges first and then delete the vertices. Then you can move the bolt without any problems. So when you're finished with that, go ahead and increment and save. Unless it's 150, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and we'll add some controls on this thing. Make sure, let everybody catch up. If you need help, let me know.